Hello, this is how to install and use Microsoft SQL Server Express 2025 and Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. This is a fresh installation of Windows 11 Pro. The SQL Server Express is related to the full Microsoft SQL Server with the limitation of 10 gigabytes per database, probably per MDF file. One CPU with as many cores or threads that physical CPU has, and 1 gigabyte of random access memory per engine, per database. Probably this has nothing to do with the disk cache for the file system. Okay, let's start downloading and installing these two pieces of software. The Wikipedia link does not work any longer. I searched on Google for MS SQL Express. So MS for Microsoft and then SQL for the SQL Server. Let's find the installer for SQL Express 2025. Download now. Save. It seems to be an online installer. It's only 4 megabytes in size. Let's find the SQL Server Management Studio. Install SQL Server Management Studio. Download. Save. Okay, so let's find the two installers and install them one by one. SQL Server 2025 Express. I don't know what the default option is. Okay, so it's a online installer, which means it will download the selected options, the packages that you have selected inside the installer to be installed. Download successful. And now probably the offline installer starts. So the online installer just downloads the offline installer, such that the online installer can be really small, 4 megabytes in size. Okay, so let's see the options. New SQL Server standalone installation. I remember this did not really change that much in the last more than 15 years. EULA, accept, next. Use Microsoft Update to check for updates. I'm not sure what this thing does, but I have checked this option. Azure. I'm not using Azure. Full text search. I don't know what this thing is. I don't want to know. AI services and language extensions. SQL Server replication. Includes a database engine. So I would guess that just this checkbox must be enabled, the database engine services. I'm not using local DB and neither these additional options, SQL Server Replication, AI Services, Full Text Search, Polybase. Installation directory, Hopefully the operating system is 64-bit, and it is. Hopefully the SQL Server Express is 64-bit, and probably it is, because it suggests that we install in c:\program files, not in c:\program files x86 directory. Says something about Microsoft Visual C++ 2017 Redist. I have pressed the button next. Named instance SQL Express, yes. SQL Server Database Engine. Let's see what this thing is. So it's probably a Windows service, I'm going to guess, because it says in here anti-service /MSSQL $SQL Express for the account name, and startup type automatic. SQL Server Browser, I'm not sure what it does. Grant perform volume maintenance tasks. Enables instant file initialization by avoiding zeroing of data pages. I don't remember this setting, so let's keep it disabled, because that's the default option, to be disabled. Okay, we want both Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication. The SQL Server has a default user administrator, which is called SA. Let's set a password for this user. Probably extremely simple passwords do not work. Okay, and then there is a Windows user, which is from the current computer, named admin. That's the user that I have used to start the desktop session. This is the user that I'm currently logged in as. Next. I should have gone through all of the tabs at the top, so maybe the installation will not be correct. The installer says that everything was installed successfully. I'm going to press the close button. I don't need this SQL Server Installation Center any longer. Let's install the other installer. Which is which? This guy, SSMS. Uses probably the Visual Studio 2022 installer framework. Visual Studio installer. The same deal, an online installer that's really small, that downloads the needed offline installers and other packages. Okay, so this is similar to the Visual Studio installer in the sense that you need to select the workloads and the individual components that you want to install. Installation directory c:\program files Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio 22. Sounds good. And the core components are pre-selected and cannot be deselected. And the rest of the things I'm not sure I need. Migration, business intelligence, AI, DevOps, tools to fit when and where you work while improving collaboration. Yeah. doesn't sound interesting. So I'm just keeping the default options, which is just the core components. Install. A 700 megabyte installer is downloaded. So we have finished installing the two installers, and indeed this is a good moment to actually start the computer. Let me do just that. Let's see if the Windows service is running. I have restarted the computer. Okay, so you sort Windows services ascending by name, and then search for the Windows services with names starting with SQL. Okay, and the important one is SQL Server and then the name of the instance in parentheses, which is SQL Express. It's running as the special Windows local user account, anti-service /mssql $SQL Express. It's started automatically and it's running. Automatic delay start. Okay, so everything looks okay in here. Let's try to connect to the SQL Server using the application that we have just installed. Microsoft SQL Server Tools 22. I cannot read. SQL Server Management Studio. Skip and add accounts later. This looks like the Visual Studio 2026 shell. Okay, server name. /SQL Express. We can connect using Windows authentication. We'll try both ways of connecting, using my user and using the SQL Server Authentication user SA. I'm not sure what this encrypt combo box does. And probably we'll need to check this checkbox, Trust Server Certificate. And this should be it, connect. And we could successfully connect to the database SQL Server /SQL Server Express. There exists the predefined MS SQL databases, master model, MSDB, and TMDB. There's security settings. For instance, you can make the, where is it? So under the SQL Server instance and then security and then logins, we can see that the user SA indeed is a the most powerful user for the SQL Server because it has the server role sysadmin. And the same has been assigned during the install to my current user, which is named admin, and also has the server role sysadmin. If you want to have additional local Windows users or Active Directory domain users have these complete rights over the SQL Server, the way to do it is probably, for instance, let's do it for the local system account. So right click on Anti-Authority System, Properties, and then Server Roles, and then enable the checkbox sysadmin. Okay, and from here on we should start creating databases. Let's learn how to use the MS SQL Server Management Studio and the MS SQL Server Express databases. I have searched on Google MS SQL tutorial. The first link in here, tutorials for SQL Server from learn.microsoft.com. Scroll in here and then says current tutorials, database engine tutorials. And then scroll in here and get to the tutorial SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, in here it says that we should install SQL Server Management Studio, which we did. We should install SQL Server, which we did. And then we should connect using MS SQL Server Management Studio to the MS SQL database. Let's actually disconnect. For instance, we can select the top level item in this TreeView Object Explorer and then click on the disconnect button. And then we can connect database engine, and this time we're going to use the other option to connect to the database. So the first one is Windows authentication, where we're using a local Windows user account, the user account that I'm using right now to use Windows in general. And then the second option is SQL Server authentication. In there we have a pre-existing user, which we have set the password of. And then the rest of the options remain the same, so just trust server certificate. And we should see the same end result, which is we could connect to the database and we have all of the objects inside Object Explorer. I'm going to go back to where we were previously. So Windows authentication. Okay, so we could connect. In here, inside the tutorial, you can see the various documentation on the various options that you have on the connect dialog. And then we can see inside Object Explorer the objects that currently exist in there. There's no user data right now inside the MS SQL Server, so there's no data created by me, the user. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is actually to create a database. You can create a database like this using SQL queries, create database, and then the name of the database. So let's try to do that. Or we could go right click, new database. Right click on the databases node inside Object Explorer. Let's actually do both. New database and then database name, tutorial DB. Let's look a bit at this user interface. So in here we can see that we are selecting the name of a database to be created. The SQL Server will be able to connect to it. The storage files will be located in here. /program files MSSQL Microsoft SQL Server /MSSQL 17.express /MSSQL/data. And the number of files will be 2. One file will be named tutorial_db.mdf, and the other one will be tutorial_db_log. Let's actually see these files. Control L, Control V, and says that this file manager has been de-elevated. Okay, so the two files will be in here with tutorial_db. The name will start. Let's look at the additional options. Initial size megabytes, really small. The auto growth, the files will grow until they will reach the limitations that we saw previously, because we're using SQL Server Express, which is, if I remember correctly, 10 gigabytes file size. It will increase in increments of 64 megabytes, and then it's unlimited, but then it will grow up to that maximum size, which is the limitation of SQL Server Express. Okay, let's see the rest of the options. I don't remember ever having looked here. Or nor here. I'm going to press the final button where the two files have been created. Let's make sure we can see file extensions. How do we do that? So I'm going to set Windows Explorer, the Windows File Manager, to have advanced settings suitable for developers. Display full path in the title bar. Show hidden files, folders, and drives. Hide empty drives. Hide extensions for known file types. Hide protected operating system files. And that's about it. The other settings that I have changed: open File Explorer 2, and in the combo box I have switched from home to this PC. And then for privacy reasons, I'm not showing any recent files. And the two files, as I said previously, are going to be tutorial_db.mdf. This is the most important file. This is where the database data is actually stored. And then there's the tutorial_db_log.ldf. L standing for log data file. Okay, LDF is a journal needed for ACID compliance, for rolling back transactions, etc. Very important file. When you delete the entire database, both files should disappear. When you back up, a copy of these files should be created. Let's actually delete the database. So right-click on the database, delete, and then make sure you always enable the checkbox close existing connections. And then you press OK. the two files have disappeared from the data directory. And now we're going to create the database using SQL syntax. So it says right click on the SQL Server inside Object Explorer and then new query. So this is a text editor for SQL syntax, has syntax highlighting, line numbers. You can split. Let's copy paste this entire block and let's see what it does. There exist 4 databases by default. You should not really touch them. You should not delete, create, update, or add rows or edit cells to them. Which means that there's plenty of SQL scripts for MS SQL Server out there that will fail to execute if the master database does not exist. So it's customary to think that the master database always exists and that you can do things like this, which is switch from the current database to the master database. This way, no database is in use except master. Certainly the tutorial DB database is not in use. You can run this entire script at once by using this button in the main toolbar, execute Alt-X, or from the main menu, query and then execute Alt-X, or you can run parts of the entire SQL script that you can see inside this tab inside the text editor. You select and then you execute. Either right-click execute or just by pressing the execute button. Okay, this is the first part of the source code where it says use the master database. And then we have this SQL query where it says if not exists something, and that something is select name from sys databases. So sys databases is this item. So it's sys databases, which is a predefined view inside the predefined table master. So we're using the table master and then we're finding the view sys.databases. Let's see how it looks like. Sys.databases, right click on the view and go select top 1000 rows. Okay, and the query goes select name from this view. There's a column named name, where name is the Unicode string tutorial DB. There's no such thing in here. You can run just this query if you want. The current database is available in this combo box. So let's run just select name from sys.databases where name equals tutorial DB. And it returns a table with a column which is named name and 0 rows. Which means that this if will be true. So this table is empty and says if not exists. So this if will be true, which means create database and then tutorial DB will be executed. In MS SQL Server, SQL syntax, I always use square parentheses around the identifiers, so table names, column names. Let's run everything. And in here, because the SQL query that we run doesn't contain any query, just commands. So there's the query command dichotomy. Commands do create, update, delete actions, and then queries do read actions on the database. So queries will actually return tables, datasets, whereas commands will say that the command has completed successfully or it has failed, and then error, and then completion time inside the tab messages. Let's see again a query. There's a special tab named results, but you still get the tab messages completed, says one row affected, and the timestamp when it finished. Let's see that the timestamp changes. So 13:29:24, 13:29:50, so it did. This messages tab is always populated, whereas the results tab is only populated for queries, so when you do read operations on a database. In this case, we're not doing a read operation, we're doing a create table operation. So this is a create operation. So the results tab will not be shown, just the messages tab. Okay, and if we're looking at the tool windows and the features inside MySQL Management Studio, there's additional helpers around running a query or a command, where we can see if the syntax is correct using this parse Ctrl F5 button. We can see a estimated execution plan. This is very useful when you want to decrease the time it takes for an SQL query to return. So you want to improve your SQL queries in two ways, both that less data is read, so there's less CPU usage, less disk usage, but you also want the SQL query to be as fast as possible. And you do that by optimizing both the queries and the data sources, primary tables. You can see the most important operation, that's the costliest. In this case, it's an index seek, cost 100%. So the rest of the operations, creating the database, filtering which is this where, creating the database which is this create database, are practically instantaneous. The only thing that actually costs is to get all of the values, all of the cells in the column name, this part, select name. And in cases like this, it's really important that this column is as fast as possible. So probably maybe even a PK, a primary key, or if not, indexed at least. Okay, we see what's happening here. Yeah, it's not a table, so you can't really create indexes on it. You are about to rename? Why? How would I rename? I have no clue what button I pressed that it wanted to rename the sys.database view. Okay. What else can we do with queries like that, like this? So this is the estimated execution plan before actually executing the SQL query. And then there's the actual execution plan. So let's see this and that and execute. Okay. So now we have our database. You cannot see it because the Object Explorer doesn't refresh automatically most of the times. So you go either on the entire database and then press the refresh F5 button, or right click and then refresh. Or you can just select databases and refresh. You need to refresh one of the parents of the node tutorial DB such that the node tutorial DB appears in the Object Explorer. Let's see what the tutorial does next. Says that now we have a database. It's a good idea to switch to it. Don't save and don't save. Let's switch to the database. Right click, new query. So you want to either select tutorial DB in this combo box, or right click on the database and new query, or use the SQL syntax, use, and then the name of the database, which is tutorial DB. Okay, let's see what this thing does. Says use tutorialdb.go and then go. No need for this thing because we have already selected, we already can see that the current database is tutorialdb, and then to get to this editor we actually went right click on the tutorial database and then new query. But this is being extra safe. Okay, and then it says if exists a table named customers of type user table, then it executes the delete style SQL query, which is drop table and then the name of it customers. Because the table does not exist, this thing actually doesn't do anything, but it's there to be extra safe. And then it's creating the customers with a create type SQL query. So create table and then table name and then 1, 2, 3, 4 columns separated by comma. There's a PK primary key. None of the cells can be null, which is strange. We have 3 columns of type Unicode 50 characters and varchar of 50. Okay, and then the first column, customer ID, is integer, and we don't know what the values will be in there. It doesn't say anything about auto increment. Let's run everything. Let's do the same thing, include actual execution plan, check, and execute. Okay, interesting why we don't see the actual execution plan. Okay, so let's see what it does. There's 3 different parts. There's a use, there's a drop if exists, and then there's a create table. So the create table is instantaneous, condition and drop object instantaneous, using database instantaneous. Great. Let's see the database being created. So tutorial DB database, and then expand the node tables. Because the node tables was not expanded before, when you actually expand, there's a computation taking place where it finds a table which is named customers. We can look at its structure like this. We can see 4 columns, 1 PK. We can see as keys 1 PK with its name auto-generated. No constraints, no triggers, 1 index, the PK clustered. And you can see all of the data inside the database. Right click on inside the table, right click on the table customers, and then select top 1000 rows. And additionally, there's the resulting dataset is empty. Or you can edit rows in bulk. You can, for instance, add new rows using this user interface where you go right click on the table and then go edit top 200. And then to see the actual SQL queries that are behind this entire table, you can go right click on the table, script table as, create to, new query window. This just creates the structure. And there's an advanced feature where you can also create the SQL query for all of the rows. Okay. Next up, let's insert some rows. Right click on the database, new query, paste and execute. Right click on the table and then select top 1000 rows. We can edit them. We can see that the customer ID field is actually a auto increment. Keith, let's name Keith something else. Okay. Select top 1000 rows. You really easily get to have 100 tabs open inside MS SQL Management Studio. So from time to time, you should go right click and close other tabs. Don't save. Okay, let's see why it doesn't like. Why is there, are there errors being shown in the syntax highlighting? Says invalid column name customer ID, which is a bug. It has the full path of the table, so database name and then customers. So this error should not exist. And then also the correct database is selected in this combo box, but that doesn't really matter because we switch the correct database using this long identifier inside the form part of the SQL query. Okay, let's now try to convert the database table to SQL queries. So right click script table as create. Only has SQL queries to create the structure. So says use the database tutorial, create table customers, 4 columns, PK, and then additional statements. So PK ascending. Let's actually configure MS SQL Management Studio to wrap lines. Let's see how that is done. Tools, options, search, wrap, word wrap. Okay, I don't like this type of wrapping where it puts on new line parts of a word. How can we fix that? Languages, and then something, and then general. Show visual glyphs for word wrap, not enough. So I want words to not be split across 2 different lines. What does this thing do? Okay, we'll have to ignore this thing. If you're not used to having line wrap on all of your text editors, maybe it's good for now to enable this checkbox show visual glyphs for word wrap. where you can see these indicator that the current line will continue on the next line inside the text editor. So there's this entire part is line 19, as you can see in the left hand side of the line. It's just that the line is presented on 3 lines such that you don't have left right scroll bars, just up down scroll bars. Okay, let's see how we can create an SQL query that also creates the cells. Right click, script table as, insert into, and then new query editor window. Or just let's put it into the clipboard and then paste here. What am I seeing here? Yeah, so it creates a template. I'm not exactly sure what this thing is useful for. Okay. Let's see the query that it has inserted. So says insert into, and then table name, the columns that will add data to. So there's 4 columns, and then the rows. The rows are enveloped in round parentheses and separated with comma. And then inside the cells of a row, you have an integer and then 3 Unicode strings. So one is an integer and then Orlando. So the string Orlando, string literal, surrounded with single quotes to make it a string, but then we want it to be a Unicode string. So that's why you would use the prefix uppercase N. It's a best practice to have 0 columns which are strings that are not Unicode. So do use nchar, do use nvarchar, do use ntext, and everything. Make sure all of the possible cells are Unicode. Going from Unicode to non-Unicode is a very specialized scenario that we should not talk about, but the default should always be Unicode. Okay, and then a read type SQL query. Right click, new query, and paste. So select all columns from table name customers. Returns a messages where it says 4 rows found when it finished, and these are the 4 rows that it could find. Email cannot be null, so the literal null value from the MS SQL Server. That's why when you insert, you specify the empty string. That's uppercase N, and then single quote, and then single quote, with nothing between single quotes. Okay. And you can modify the way results are presented by selecting one of the following options in the main toolbar. Results to grid, so this results tab. Results to text. Okay, so the same results tab, but now it shows the data set as plain text. and then it says whatever it said previously in the messages tab, which is 4 rows affected and completion timestamp. And the third option is result to file. Yeah, so it creates probably a plain text file with extension RPT, and it asks for the location where to save. Having arrived here, we're at the end of the Microsoft tutorial. We now know how to install the MS SQL Server, we know how to install MS SQL Management Studio, we know how to connect both, how to switch databases, how to create databases, how to delete databases, both using SQL queries and using the mouse. So right-click on the database in new database, right-click on the database, delete. Remember to check the checkbox close existing connections. We know how to create tables. You can go right-click table, new on table, and then new table, or use the SQL queries as we did previously. You know how to look at the various results seen as a plain text or as a data grid. You know how to validate that your SQL query is correct. You know how to anticipate if the SQL query will be costly using display estimated execution plan Ctrl-L. And then you can see the actual time and parts of the SQL queries that took most resources and time, which is include actual execution plan Ctrl-M. At this point, I'm going to continue a bit, only learning SQL query syntax using the tutorial from W3 Schools. So SQL is a programming language, SQL pronounced, which I usually pronounce SQL, structured query language. There's a ISO standard, but the SQL Server has many extensions. So the SQL Server supports parts of the SQL standard plus a ton of extensions. And a ton of SQL Server documentation will say TSQL in some places, so uppercase T and then minus SQL, for instance. When they're talking about MS SQL specific extensions to SQL structured query language to do additional things. So we have syntax and keywords for deleting a database or a table, for selecting a database, for selecting cells, so read operation, inserting rows or adding rows, appending rows, where, which is a condition. We're using a Microsoft SQL Server. Select asterisk from customers, exactly what we have. Okay, so let's run this thing. Customer ID, name, address, etc. SQL is the language is not case sensitive, but I always use uppercase for keywords, SQL keywords. There's both semicolon like this, but also the instruction go for separating statements. We can select a subset of columns, not all of the columns. So let's do that. Let's select name. There's auto-completion. Wrong auto-completion, of course, because it cannot believe that we're using the tutorial DB database. It's the same error that you see in here. Okay. So you can select just one column. You can select two columns. How do we do that? The second column would be location. Control X will delete empty lines, similar to the feature from Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. So select is for reading cells. And when you want to read cells, you're going to do operations of types get me all of the cells on the list of columns from a table, get me something from multiple tables, compute something, so get, for instance, a concatenation of name and location, or multiply by 5 the customer ID. And then you can select just one row using the syntax where. If you want to get just one cell, then you're probably going to use a where to select just one row. And then in the select statement, you're going to put just the column name of that cell. So for instance, if you want just Kane, then you're going to go select name from customers, and then you go where location is India. It works even though I did not provide a Unicode string. And we know how to select all of the columns. We know how to select from a table. Select distinct, the distinct keyword. Let's see. What are the contents of the table? So Control X to delete the entire row. Alt X. Let's add a new row inside the table customers. So right click on the table and then edit top 200 rows. Let's add something from Germany. Don't populate the customer ID field because it's auto increment. And when you're done, you click on another row like this one. Okay, so customer ID is not auto-incremented, it was actually inserted using the insert statement, SQL statement that we have run before. So we need to place here a 5 manually. And now we can go to another row and it will save the current row. There's no need to press the Save All button because it doesn't do what you think it does. Okay, and now we can check that there's a 5th row. Right click on the table, select top 1000 rows. You should see customer ID 5. And now back to where we were, which is select asterisk from customers, and we want distinct by location. So although there's 5 rows, Germany appears twice. So instead of showing Australia, India, Germany, United States, and then Germany again, it stops at United States. This is what the distinct does. So it returns a set, not a list. So the difference between a list and a set would be that a set can have an item just once, at most once. Okay, we could do these distinct things on multiple columns. I'm not sure why you would do that. You can select just one column, which is this thing, Alt X. Count distinct values. Yeah, let's see. Select count. Location should return 5. And then if we go select count and then distinct, it should go 4. So I'm not respecting this tutorial because I'm forcing myself to both write all of the keywords uppercase, which the tutorial does, but then I also force myself to have all of the identifiers inside the database be wrapped in square parentheses. Okay, what is this thing? Select count as distinct, district. Okay, so some technologies that allow you to run SQL queries don't respect the latest SQL standards. SQL, the language. There's this overload where MS SQL, Microsoft insists on referring to it as SQL Server, whereas SQL is the structured query language. That's why I always call it the offering from Microsoft. I always call it MS SQL, never SQL. Because SQL is a language and MS SQL is a storage technology for data. And now we introduce the where. The where clause is to only return certain rows, not all of the rows all of the time. Okay, let's see this thing. Select asterisk from customers. Okay, so that dbo.prefix is not mandatory in SQL queries. And then we want to only show the 2 rows where location is Germany. Alt X. If you remember, the execution plan actually goes through the entire column location. And that's 99% of the time used. So this thing. Clustered index scan, clustered customers, PK customer. So it does this thing twice. Yeah, I don't know how to interpret these things. There's a PK and that's indexed and that's very important. We're not actually interested into the primary key column. We're interested in the column location, because this is what we're using inside the query to select the rows, and then all of the cells on those rows. Yeah, interpreting this execution plan is a skill and an art. Convert implicit nvarchar 4000 for the first parameter. Wow, what is that thing? Yeah, it's a skill and an art. Next up, we can select all columns, place a condition for rows. We can select a list of columns, place a condition for rows. You can use where in select, so where you do reads, but you can also use it in delete when you do deletes, or in update when you do updates. So in the sense of CRUD, create, read, update, delete. So select would be read, and then update is update, delete is delete. And there's also the create, to create tables and databases. Okay, and then it says that be careful when you use the condition. We know that this field location is a Unicode string, so it's nvarchar of 50 or something. We can see it in here, nvarchar of 50 for location, which means you probably want such a condition, so equals and then a string literal. But then when you're looking for customer ID, which is integer, you're not going to provide a string literal as the value to compare against. Let's see that thing. So this should crash, but it doesn't. It says that it has been parsed successfully. Whereas if you actually execute it, it provides the correct error, which is to say that Germany is not int. But then this type of error, computing this error actually requires going to the database and finding the actual type of the column customer ID from the table customers. And maybe parse doesn't actually touch the database, it just looks at the text that you have inside the text editor. That's why it said that it's successful. The parse Ctrl F5 button. Okay, so customer ID equals, and then you provide an integer number like 4. Operators in the where clause, you can say all of the customers with ID less than 4. So there should be 1, 2, and 3. Greater than, less than, greater or equal, less than or equal, equals is just a single equality sign. And then not equal is less than, greater than, not question mark, not exclamation point equals. Depending on the SQL interpreter, you might also have between, like, and in. Okay, if you don't like the order of the resulting data set, for instance, you want the countries, what could be, you want the names sorted. So you go order by, and then name. Let's check and run. Ascending is the default sort order, but you can say ask or desk like this. Let's have it ask to be obvious, or desk. So the name should be O, K, and then D. Correct. And the ordering is dependent on the collation of the database. There are different sorting rules for strings for the Turkish alphabet compared to the English alphabet, for instance. I'm not sure where the collation can be shown. This thing. So you go right click on a database, properties, and then general tab, and then maintenance, and then collation. Says SQL Latin 1 general CP CIAS. So that means Latin 1 doesn't sound at all okay. I'm not sure exactly what it does, but it sounds like US English. And then CI means case insensitive, and AS means accent sensitive, probably. Yeah, when you create your databases, you should select the perfect collation for your use case. Hopefully you can use the exact same collation throughout your entire database for all of the tables, all of the columns. But if that's not the case, then you can set collation to more fine-grained elements than just the database. We did order by descending. We did order by ascending. Okay. And you can have multiple order, which is really useful when multiple columns are very related. Like if you want to sort alphabetically first by the family name, the second name, and then if multiple rows have the same second name, family name, and then also order alphabetically ascending by the first name. Okay, you can order some columns ascending, some other descending. I haven't used this thing ever. So very advanced scenarios are presented in tutorials, and I'm not exactly sure why that is. Okay. And then you can have more complex conditions. Condition means the where line. It's a good idea to actually have these parts on different lines. So selecting on a line, from on a line, where on another line. You can have everything on a single line and it works just as well. But I would totally split this thing on different lines. Okay, so let's have a very complex condition. You can comment out the where using two minuses, Alt X. So let's see, we want country like G, E, and name starting with D. Let's see how we do that. So where location like GE is too restrictive, so like goes hand in hand with the placeholder %. So you want everything that starts with GE. Again, parts of the syntax are case insensitive. Maybe because the collation is case insensitive, the collation of the database. It says in here CI, case insensitive. Okay, you can have all sorts of strange capitalizations. You should probably go with the correct one. Okay, and then we want, and name starts with D. So let's do name ends in A. So the name ends in A, the location starts in GE, and this is the rest of the string, the rest of the cell. So rest of the cell and then A, it's the case for Donna, and GE and the rest of the cell is correct for this cell with location Germany. All conditions must be true. That's what AND means. You can have AND, OR, and then you can tweak the precedence between AND and OR using round parentheses. So this is just makes sense. When you use like and then or, for me, this thing is totally not readable. So I would, of course, put this thing in parentheses. Like this. SQL or. Yes, or is or and AND is AND. If you have programmed before, you know how to use them. Not with the keyword not. Not equality, not like, not between, not in, is not null, not exists. And then you can put a not around everything. Like this. Not like this, like this. So you can negate any where condition by just wrapping the entire condition in round parentheses and placing a not in front. Not like, of course. And then there's the placeholder %, which means 0, 1, or multiple characters. So similar to the regex dot. And then dot asterisk. And then underscore means just a single character, similar to dot in regular expressions. Not between 10 and 60. I'm not sure why you would use such a syntax instead of using greater than and less than operators. Sets not in. Let's see that. Select customers where location not in Germany. A set with a single element. This being the set. Not greater than, not less than. Okay. Insert into, we just saw insert into when we placed the 4 rows in the table. Insert into table name and then values. A row you surround it with round parentheses and then you use comma to separate the rows. You need to specify the names of the columns that you're going to insert into, because for instance you have a table with 20 columns and you want to insert only in 3 of those columns. It's going to put nulls everywhere else. This is how you insert multiple rows. There's a special value named null, which is not allowed in our case. Let's actually make it appear. So new column, and then what should we put in here? Phone number and varchar of 20 and nullable. This checkbox allow nulls. Save and click on the columns, press the refresh button, and then right click on customers and select top 1000. And now you're going to have a ton of cells that have the value null. Not the empty string like this cell, but the actual null value. Is null, is not null. Update is if you want to change values in cells, so if you want to write. So you want, for instance, the customer with customer ID 1 to change its email from the empty string to something. Let's actually do this. How do we do that? Update and then table name. And then set. And then email. What's the email? Orlando from Australia. Okay, and then we want to edit just one cell. So for that, we want to put the condition on the correct row. So we can go either location is Australia or name is Orlando or customer ID. The safest is to use the primary key, the customer ID. There might be two at some point, even though now there's just one row from Australia. In time, there might appear a second row from Australia. Whereas the customer ID is more unique. Alt X. And now if we select all of the rows, we should see the new value in this cell, email for Orlando. And this should be it. MS SQL Server has worked correctly for me for many years. First there was MSDE 2000, and then there was SQL Server Express. For a ton of usage, we could use these versions of the full Microsoft SQL Server. And in general, if you must use Microsoft SQL Server, if your customers use Microsoft SQL Server, have licenses, and request that your software, the software that you write, supports Microsoft SQL Server, then you might ship your product with using MS SQL Server Express. For instance, if there's in the installer, you ask the user what Microsoft SQL Server instance to use. And if there's no such thing, you help the user during the installation of your product to install Microsoft SQL Server Express. This is it. Thank you.